Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Kenneth Sorenson, and we're on Kidney Disease Editorial Edition with Kenneth Sorenson. I want to start out, I'd be remiss in not saying, Happy Memorial Day. It's definitely not happy for some people. I want to set a special shout out to a good friend of mine, Heather Gray Blaylock, and her kids, Ava, Naya, and Garrett. They lost their father, Major W. David Gray, on August 8th, 2012. He has a great family, and they paid the ultimate sacrifice, and he paid the ultimate sacrifice for us to be able to do things like this. So I definitely want to thank that. I hope everyone's doing great. Please look out for your friends in the South. I know in my area it got up to 101 today. I think 103 yesterday, and that's without humidity. So this is May. July and August are hot months. Please say a prayer for those of us that are living in this incredible heat. But anyway, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about dialysis, and those of you that know anything about kidney disease know that this is where pretty much everyone is heading that has kidney disease. You can slow it down once you get it, but you usually can't stop it. Dialysis is definitely not a cure for any kidney disease. It's kind of a band-aid, but it's a really, really, really tough band-aid. A lot of people, it ends up making them sicker than they were before. And I was one of those. I was even taken off dialysis. I started on peritoneal dialysis and was on that for about a year or so. Then, because of stomach issues, they decided to try hemo. I was so sick while I had hemo that they took me off for a few months to see if it made me any better, and it actually did make me feel better. And then my creatinine got up to 13.5, and my amazing doctor, said, he couldn't take any more chances, so they put me back on. Luckily, after that, I was only on for another 7 or 8 months. So I was lucky. I met some people at my clinic that were on it 17, 18, 19, 20 years. I was blessed that I was only on it for on and off 4 years. But the first thing I'd like to talk a little bit about when it comes to dialysis is the history. There's two major forms. There's hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis. When I start talking about the business end, pretty much most of my conversation is having to do with hemodialysis. But a little bit about both of them, a little bit of history behind them. We'll start by talking about hemo. Um, there were a few attempts at it before the 1940s, but it wasn't until a Dutchman named Wilhelm Kolff developed what he called artificial kidney. He developed that around 1943. He treated about 12 patients while he was trying this artificial kidney, and only one patient had any sort of success. But this did allow him to move from the United States to to the United States from the Netherlands. Another interesting fact is Kolb also did this in the Netherlands while it was under Nazi occupation. So I don't know if that's a sign that it wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but that's when it did happen. When he moved to the United States, he was in a hospital. He was at a hospital in, I think, Maryland, and he wanted to do one thing with it, and they wanted something else, and so he kind of split off and tried to do some other stuff with it. The Also, dialysis as we know it was started at the University of Washington by a guy named Dr. Belding Scribner, and he figured out a way to treat end-stage renal disease patients through an access point in the arm, and that's kind of where most of us get it now. Obviously, there's the catheter also, but he did it with the end-stage line, and he was also the first one to open a dialysis clinic. He did that in 1962. To give you an idea of how odd it was to get dialysis in a center. In 1973, and always remember that date, that's kind of a key date when it comes to renal disease in this country. Up until 1973, 90% of the people got in-home hemodialysis. It was obviously something that there very few people did it, and it was something that mostly rich people got because it was such an expensive process. But in 1973, what switched is from 1973 till today is 90% of people actually get it in center now. So we'll talk about later what the change is, why that happened. But think about that. 90% at one time got it at home, and now only 10% get it at home. Um, uh, let's talk about a little bit about kind of the business of dialysis. Um, as you've probably heard on this network many times, that um, that chronic kidney disease is the ninth leading cause of death in this country. Um, the U.S. spends nearly the top of the list of countries on dialysis, near the top of the industrialized countries on dialysis. Yet somehow we have one of the highest mortality rates. So we have a great deal of the industrialized countries, like we're thinking like the UK, Canada, those kind of countries, Scandinavian countries, a lot of Europe, but yet we have one of the highest mortality rates. So it kind of makes you wonder why we spend that much if we're not getting results. The United States has always been kind of a results-oriented country, and it's clear through my research that there's some things that results don't matter as much about, and dialysis is one of them, and kidney disease is one of them. So we also, one of the main reasons is too many people get rich off of not providing good care or cures for kidney disease. And so also my last show I mentioned that 10% of the world is has some stage of kidney disease. In the US there are about 468,000 people on dialysis. um, Part of that 1973 date is a Republican president, Richard Nixon, signed into law in 1973 a bill that allowed everybody that had, or everyone that went on dialysis would get Medicare. And so what that did was dialysis companies started springing up all over the place because they figured now we're definitely going to get paid. Before, only rich people could afford dialysis. Now the government was going to pay a vast majority of dialysis. So oddly enough, that's when businesses started saying, "Wow, we can make a lot of money off of this," which is kind of sad. Off them making money off of people that are dying. Um, so, so I heard a joke one time by a guy doing a story on it and said that meant starting in 1973 that one organ of your body actually had universal health care. So in a sense, one organ of your body was Canada. So kidney disease became a universal healthcare provided organ, and so then that's when you see the dialysis clinics start to pop up. Um, so there are two major dialysis companies in the United States that own 70% of the dialysis clinics, and those are DeVita and Fresenius. I'm going to focus mostly on I'm going to focus mostly on DeVita. And if you follow Steve at all, you'll see he takes pictures of dialysis clinics everywhere. They're located usually near each other. They have a tendency to be more prevalent in poorer communities because kidney disease is much higher in those areas. Steve's even taken pictures of dialysis clinics right next to funeral homes. He's taken pictures right next to fast food places or pizza places and things like that because they know where their audience is. And also with the funeral home, they know where their audience is headed. I've seen many people pass away that I went to dialysis with, and I always felt blessed because I wasn't to that point, thank the Lord. But uh, it doesn't mean I couldn't have gotten at that point. People that know me know that I went through some rough times where things were a little more touch and go than obviously they are today. I was blessed when I got my transplant. So so also, um, so let's talk a little bit about DeVita. DeVita is the dialysis clinic I went to, and I was lucky enough to have really good workers at my clinic. I can't say every single one of them were, but I still keep in touch with some of them. I still visit them because they really did do a lot for me, and so I was thankful for that. But it's my understanding from talking to others that my case wasn't very common. There's a lot of they have two lawsuits that I know of out. One about a tech, so someone that's not a licensed person like an RN like Steve was, accidentally put bleach in lines and killed some people. Also, they have another lawsuit because a lot of people are saying they weren't paid what they should have been paid, particularly overtime. Those of you that have been around dialysis clinics know that those people work way more hours than um, I think they should when they're dealing with people. The other problem I had with my clinic, yet again, it was one of the better ones, was, there's two nurses on staff for, I don't know, I think there was 24 chairs or something like that. Usually the only time you got nurses assistants in particular was if you had a catheter. Here in South Carolina, they're required to put you on the machine. But, I saw many people that had techs that would have to stick them 3 or 4 times to get them. And, I can tell you this, and maybe I'm a big baby, but one stick is bad enough. So, um, they're obviously, in order to make the most profits they can, they staff as little as possible. If you also talk to people that do dialysis in countries that have universal health care, like the UK and things like that, it's much more pleasant. It's, because they're not trying to make money. So they have enough staff. They also have, a more pleasant environment. It's not as hospital-like as a dialysis clinic here in the United States. You're not in some huge room with a bunch of other people with a bunch of chairs with a bunch of beeping going off. Those of you that have been in a clinic know how unpleasant it is. But a little bit about uh, DeVita's business. They're about a $13 billion a year company. Yes, $13 billion. And so think about that. If you think about this, 1% of the United States budget is spent on dialysis, or kidney disease in general, but I'd say 95% of that is on dialysis. That's a crazy amount if you think about it. That's approximately, as of the last budget that was released by the Congressional Budget Office, that's about $47.46 billion spent on dialysis, and that's pretty incredible. There's so many other things that money could be going to if we would spend more of it on a cure. I did a little bit of research on the amount spent on different diseases, trying to find cures and doing research and stuff like that. Um, AIDS, for instance, it's about $2,000 to $3,000 per patient is spent on research and trying to find cures. Cancer patients, it's $200 to $300 spent on finding cures and things like that. Kidney disease, yet again, the ninth largest killer in the United States. There's $2 to $3 per patient spent on research and development trying to figure out cures for it. So if you think about that, there's not much money spent on this disease that's extremely prevalent in the United States. I think there's 95,000 people on transplant lists waiting for a kidney transplant. So in addition to, and I want to say there's 109,000 people living in the United States that have kidney transplants. And I was speaking with a doctor the other day, and he made sure I knew that transplant, dialysis, none of those things are cures. They're ultimately band-aids. One of the things Steve has really pushed is nutrition and exercise. And the reason he does that is because he wants to try to get people to prevent kidney disease, not just know about dialysis, know about kidney disease, but he wants you to know enough about it to prevent it a little bit. Um, all right, and then again, DeVita does everything they can to um, follow the state guidelines to a minimum. So they're not going above and beyond. They're not doing anything more. I've also heard through various sources that they're developing a bionic kidney to hopefully, obviously, that also won't be a cure, but it also will mean some people that are currently not eligible for transplants, because transplants are kind of precious commodities, that they would be eligible for a bionic kidney, because I mean, there would be no loss if it doesn't work, that kind of thing. And right now, the dialysis clinics and drug companies are really trying to fight it because they don't want a cure. They don't want anything that's going to hurt them. They know that if the bionic kidney actually gets passed, which I've heard rumors that it might be starting to test in 2020. If it does pass and people can get it, it will, make dialysis clinics, they'll still exist, but they will definitely lose a tremendous amount of people, because that would allow a lot of people to get some, their own kidney. And the artificial kidney, obviously, the guy Clough that did it in the 40s, 1943. That was kind of his idea for it. He didn't implant it because they didn't have that technology yet, but that was kind of his idea, is, putting making another kidney that could, that we could manufacture in order to get, uh, more people, the access to treatment for renal disease. So, um, all right, uh, so there may be a solution. All right, so like one of the to give a little bit of opinions, I've given a lot of information on DeVita and dialysis. Oh, and I didn't go through kind of the history of PD. I'll do that real quick. PD is peritoneal dialysis. Oddly enough, the first case of the first mention of the peritoneum, the kind of membrane around your organs, or your stomach in particular, where peritoneal dialysis is done. The first mention was 150 1555 BC. Even before Egyptians had noticed it. They were the ones that really noticed it. They didn't really do anything with it, but they did notice, and they kind of, I think they had ideas that, it could be used for something. But peritoneal dialysis, or the use of peritoneal dialysis, the first kind of, I guess, peritoneal exploration was in 1744 with red wine. It was to cure a disease. It's my understanding it didn't work, but they thought, hey, that's a pretty good idea. A little bit later, 130 years later, in 1877, they used saline, to kind of infuse, and they thought that could cure something. But it didn't necessarily do it, but it gave, even more information about the use of it. They knew it could absorb really quickly. In 1923, a guy named Ganter used PD to treat renal failure for the first time, and he still used saline. But that obviously didn't work. A few years later, in 1927, dextrose was used for the first time. And so, and those of you that do PD today or know anything about it, peritoneal dialysis is used, dextrose is used. Obviously, since then, they've added more things to make it better, like I think sodium bicarbonate, some other things. But peritoneal dialysis, as we know it, started in 1927. So it's even older than hemo, which was surprising to me, because I just would think that hemo would have been the first one, try to clean the blood, but no, peritoneal was the first form of dialysis, and some of my kind of thoughts, and next time I'm going to try to do a little bit of explaining of insurance in this company, like in the United States. Like, dialysis patients get Medicare. Okay, all right. So what's going on with other people? Like, I saw something on Facebook the other day about the amount of money that the CEOs of insurance companies get, yet we can't afford it. I know people that are. I think that people from all over the world are interested in why we live in this country, and healthcare can't be afforded by the vast majority of people. There's people I genuinely care about that can't go to the doctors unless it's the emergency room, because they can't afford healthcare. And there's no way we're going to eradicate things like kidney disease or lower the numbers if people don't have healthcare, because preventive care is very important. Right now, we're a very reactive care in the United States, and so I think a lot of people would benefit from being able to worry about preventive care. But talking about dialysis a little bit, and I'll talk from my experience along with others I've heard of and others I've witnessed. Dialysis is a life saving measure. Um, it's a horrible life saving measure. I was always jealous of the people that had no issues with dialysis, that could walk out and they were fine. But those are very few and far between. When I left my dialysis clinic, luckily I could drive most of the time. I'd go home and I'd sleep because I just couldn't handle it. And then the whole next day, I'm recovering from it. And then by the time I recover, it's time to do it again. I never really understood why something that was good for you could make you feel so bad. I know people that have chemotherapy and things like that feel the same way. The big difference is chemotherapy is poison. Dialysis isn't supposed to be. Um, and so, and I literally saw people kind of die in front of me. They kept getting worse and worse rather than better and better. Um, and so, I think the toughest thing I ever did in my life, and this includes going through the transplant process and things like that, the toughest thing I ever did in my life was go through dialysis. Peritoneal dialysis is a little bit easier on you. I definitely can see that. But on the other side of the coin, you have to set up everything. You're constantly worried about infection and things like that when you're doing it yourself and things like that. And I never encountered it, but I just knew that it wasn't particularly for me. But I definitely understand the proponents of it. But uh, but hemodialysis, to talk a little bit more about the business, on average, they probably make about $5,000 a month off of dialysis patients, which is crazy if you think about it. You're there for 3 hours a day, or three. I'm sorry, 3 to 4 hours a day, usually 3 days a week, and they're making $5,000 a person off of you. And yet again, that's guaranteed money because it's coming from the federal government. I got a feeling the dialysis stakes would be way different, and there may be even more money spent on cures if if it wasn't $5,000 a month. If Medicare didn't cover it, uh, um, you know, they wouldn't cover it if Medicare didn't exist. And so the regular insurance companies wouldn't give them as much as the federal government's willing to give them. And so they wouldn't make the kinds of profits they're making. Um, the the dialysis industry, as I said, is such a huge industry that they're in cahoots with hospitals. There's even some doctors, I've read about in various occasions where doctors have stakes in dialysis, nephrologists have stakes in dialysis companies, and so they want you to go to dialysis too. I was lucky that that wasn't necessarily the case for my doctor, but I've read lots of stories of people that witnessed, a dialysis clinic right next door to a nephrologist because the nephrologist's office had a stake in the company. So if you think everyone that you're talking to is looking out for you, you're definitely incorrect. Um, there are definitely good people out there, but there certainly isn't, and we're lucky that we have something like the Urban Health Outreach Network to talk to allow people to talk about what different things are out there that you may not be seeing. Yes, none of us, I think Steve had a doctor on a show last night, but none of us are necessarily doctors. And so I'll never tell you what's best for you, but I'll tell you what worked for me, and the others will do the same. Um, so, so, and if you think in my small town, or I guess it's a medium-sized town, there are, I believe, 4 dialysis clinics in this town. Um, if you look at Steve in Baltimore, I mean, I haven't counted, but I feel like there's 1,000 in Baltimore, and they're just getting more and more. I mean, they right outside my town in a neighboring town, they just built another dialysis clinic, just for people doing home dialysis, whether it's hemo or peritoneal. And all the time they're so short staffed because they keep opening more and more and more and more. The best tech at my clinic just left to open one about an hour and a half away. Um, uh, and he was a great tech, and so the clinic's losing someone good because they needed to move someone good to another center. And Columbia, South Carolina isn't a tiny city; it's the capital of our state, and they're opening more and more in that area. So these companies are going to keep building unless we start becoming aware of kidney disease and we start spreading the word of, how to prevent it, how to, I guess, prolong, not, continuing into later and later stages. As almost everyone on these channels have mentioned, hypertension and diabetes are the two main causes. And I happen to at one time have both of them. I still have diabetes. My hypertension is much better under control, but those are the things that caused my kidney disease. And those are things that you can work on. You can't, if you're diabetic, you're not going to get rid of diabetes. If you got hypertension, it'll take a lot to get rid of it, but it is possible to get rid of it. But it is definitely possible to keep it definitely in the forefront of your mind and make sure that you're doing everything you can to kind of battle it. So definitely worry about that. Just remember, when you're dealing with dialysis, you're not dealing with a company that wants to help you. They're not there to save lives. They're there to keep you on dialysis for as long as they can so they can make as much money as they can. And that's the company. The people that work there, there's definitely good people that work at those clinics, but the company doesn't even care about them. Yet again, if they can find someone cheaper to do that job, they're going to. If you notice, there's a lot of dialysis clinics that hire people right out of nursing school. They do that because they're cheaper. The more experienced people cost more money, and that's not what they're trying to do. As I said, they're not trying to save lives. They're trying to make profits. I think it's really, really sad that we live in the country that we live in, and there are people profiting off of people dying. I just can't imagine that. It makes me very sad, and I talk to people about it all the time because we all have things we're passionate about, and the biggest thing I'm passionate about is I think everyone in this country should have health care because I think it should be a basic right. Just like, people don't mind tax managers going to schools, roads, things like that. I'm not sure why they have a problem with it going to healthcare. And we'll debate a little bit more of that when we talk about health insurance next week. I'll talk about that a little more about kind of the hospital system and things like that. But if you think about it, the two major dialysis clinics in particular, which are probably the most you'll see around, they're extremely profitable and they keep growing and growing. The last figure I had was 13 billion for DeVita. For all I know, DeVita, and I think that was probably by the end of 2017. So we're a year and a half or so into that process, and I'm sure they're up to 15 or 16 billion dollars by now. And I can tell you this: their standard of care didn't get better. The amount of work they're putting in didn't become more. And so if we're going to put our tax dollars towards dialysis, I think we need to find a way and find people that want to make it the best experience and the best for the patients. And right now, I don't feel like that's going on in this country. And to be honest, it's more pleasant in other countries, but they're doing the same process. The filtering of the blood through the machine, or the peritoneum with the dextrose, is still going on. That's the only way we know of to give dialysis, and it hasn't improved a great deal for hemodialysis since the 60s. And think about that. It's been since 1962. The machines have gotten more advanced in the sense that the technology has gotten greater, but the actual process hasn't gotten better since 1962. We're in 2019. Just about everything's gotten better except for that. And it costs money for that. And yet again, they're not willing to spend it to improve it. Why do they have to if the government or the people getting it don't hold them to a higher standard? They're the only game in town. And when you're the only game in town, you have no reason to improve because you're going to make less money if you improve. So you need to do everything you can to keep that money going. So, but I do want to thank everyone for listening tonight. The show's going to change times and days. Steve and I are still working on it. I think it's going to be Thursdays from 8 to 8:30. But I'll definitely put out information when I know for sure. I want to thank everyone for listening, and also if you have any questions or any comments or anything like that, my name is Kenneth Sorenson. You can find me on Facebook. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. And please send me show ideas and things like that. As I said, I think next time we're going to talk a little bit about the health insurance in the country. But thank you very much, everyone, for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. And yet again, I'll let you guys know. Thanks for watching Kidney Disease Editorial Edition with Kenneth Sorenson. Thank you very much. Good night.